something happened to me last night where I mean I've been a Christian, but last night God appeared to me and he told me that homosexual lovemaking was every bit as beautiful and loving and good as heterosexual procreative sex in the system of marriage. And he said, come and let everyone know that. I said, no, God, they won't believe me. They will not believe me. How do I where do we go from here practically with divine
this guy, dude, what is up with the Q&A? No wonder y'all told me to react to the Q&A. This is hilarious. The God Debate 2, Sam Harris versus William Lane Craig, and we're moving on into the Q&A session. People told me, listen, you can't stop there. There's a lot more. So I won't waste any more time. If you haven't seen our first 3 reactions to this debate, please do so. It's in the description. Let's see what happens.
To lie to ourselves or to our children about the nature of reality. If we want to understand our situation in the world, along with these deeper possibilities, we have to do it in the spirit of science. Given that people have had these remarkable experiences in every context, while worshiping one God, while worshiping hundreds, while worshiping none, that proves that a deeper principle is at work. That the sectarian claims of our various religions can't possibly be true in that context. And all we have is human conversation to capture these possibilities. We can either have a first century conversation as dictated by the New Testament, or a 7th century conversation as dictated by the Quran, or a 21st century conversation that leaves us open to the full wealth of human learning.
So he's wrapping up his...
Please think about these things.
Yeah. Good job. All right. It makes a lot of sense. Like, humans have experiences, period, from every culture, every religion, you name it. And so this is to be expected if it's just a universal thing that humans experience and not the truth of one religion or any specific religion.
We're now moving to 5-minute closing speeches. Timekeeper, are you ready? Okay, begin.
In my closing statement, I'd like to try to draw together some of the threads of the debate and see if we can come to some conclusions. First, I argued that God, if he exists, provides the sound foundation for objective moral values and duties. By the time of his last rebuttal, the only argument that I heard Dr. Harris offering against this position is to say that you're merely defining God as good, which is the same fallacy I accused him of committing. I don't think this is the case at all. God is a being worthy of worship. Any being that is not worthy of worship is not God. And therefore, God must be perfectly good and essentially good. More than that, as Anselm saw, God is the greatest conceivable being. And therefore, he is the very paradigm of goodness itself. He is the greatest good. So once you understand the concept of God, you can see that asking, well, why is God good, is sort of like asking, why are all bachelors unmarried?
The whole thing is just silly to me, coming from, I don't think there is a God. So it's just very weird hearing the phraseology like that. And then when you look at the world and you see all the evils that we do see happening, God's so good, now you got to explain that, right? But, and they always have an explanation. There's always some wiggle room out of why God, an all-powerful, all-good God, would still have evil exist.
It's the very concept of the greatest conceivable being, a being worthy of worship, that entails the essential goodness of God. And I think it's evident that if God exists, then we do have objective moral values and duties. Secondly, I argued, if God does not exist, we have no foundation for objective moral values or objective moral duties. I showed that on his view, it is logically...
Think about what he's saying just for 1 second. if God doesn't exist, a thing that likely doesn't exist, if it doesn't exist, then there is no objective moral values. So you may pretend, like, let's just go ahead for the sake of the argument, assume there is no God. Okay, you now have invented a sky daddy. You've invented a being out there that isn't there. Let's just suppose we figured that out, which we haven't figured that out, but let's just suppose the case that God doesn't exist is the real one. It's the factual one. So now you've invented something to give foundation to. You've now said, okay, I'm going to ground it all in that. Therefore, you have no ultimate foundation for morality. Why can't someone ground ethics and morality in empirical data, in observable empirical data in the world around us? Why must we ground it outside of that into something that doesn't exist? Supposing my analogy here, if it doesn't exist, why are we putting it in there and saying, oh, nope, it's grounded in that? You have not even proven that the God you're talking about exists at all. So why the hell are we even wasting our time here listening to you talk about objective morality that is based in something that doesn't exist? If that thing doesn't exist, there's no reason to even begin talking about objective this, objective that. So the real problem should be on how observing and trying to base ethics and morality objectively into a real world, scientific method rather than some outside, the observable, testable universe. It's silly to me.
Impossible to say that the moral landscape is identical to the landscape of the flourishing of conscious beings and that therefore his view is incoherent. We also looked at the is-ought distinction, and the ought implies can, to which Dr. Harris has never replied in the course of this evening's debate. In his last speech, he said, but we simply must rely upon certain axioms. Well, that's the same as saying you've got to take it by faith. And if these axioms are moral axioms, then I think he's admitting my point that on atheism, there simply is no ground for believing the objectivity of moral values and duties. He just takes them by a leap of faith. He says, well, there are different senses of the word objective. Yes, of course. And in my opening speech, I made clear the sense in which I was defining the term.
Yeah, but you're defining the term. It's like every debate Craig's in, it needs to go Craig's way. It needs to be Craig's language. You need to respond to everything Craig says. And even when you do, he still goes, well, he hasn't sufficiently responded to my answer when I said da. It's a big fucking gotcha, dude. It's all it is. It's like a big gotcha. It doesn't feel like, an honest research of trying to figure out what the case is.
I mean valid and binding, independent of human opinion. And moral values are not objectively binding and valid in that.
Imagine binding something into something independent of human opinion, but that thing doesn't exist. You just made up some shit. Think about that. That's pretty crazy. It's kind of interesting, though, because, Sam can point out how counterintuitive the universe is, how no matter what we humans might like or think, there's a measurable, testable, observable thing that seems to be the best for the most well-being for humans, and at least it can be grounded in actual things we can test and study and research rather than in something that we have no clue exists and likely doesn't.
That way on atheism. He says science can study subjective facts. For example, pain is a subjective fact. Granted, that's certainly true. So my question is the wrongness of an action a subjective fact? On atheism, it's hard to see how it couldn't be anything more than a subjective fact, in which case you cannot say, as Dr. Harris wants to say, and I agree with him, that the genital mutilation of little girls is objectively wrong, not just a subjective opinion. He says, well, but if you're psychopathic or neurotic, there's something wrong with you. Granted, I agree with that. There is something wrong with you. But
yeah, but there would be something objectively, like based on the standard principle of what humans experience. If 95% of humans, 98% of humans aren't sociopaths, psychopaths, whatever, then there is something objectively, observably wrong with that person. Based on the standard. Well, it's not 100% objectively, like, what do you mean? Like, there's good reason to be able to weigh it out and consider when something is obviously not the standard, not what typically is the case for most humans. And you're just grounding it into something that doesn't exist, and that made the rules or the laws that you claim It's just weird to me. This whole thing is so weird to me.
The question is, on atheism, if atheism were true, would there be anything objectively morally wrong with doing what the psychopath does? He hasn't been able to show that. Indeed, there are no moral duties on his
Oh my gosh. Yeah, okay.
view. And remember, he himself admitted that psychopaths could occupy the peaks of well-being on his so-called moral landscape, and that therefore it is not a moral landscape at all.
It feels like he's strawmanning the shit out of Sam still. Like, Sam nowhere in any way in any of what he's said has conceded what William Lane Craig is trying to say.
To conclude, I want to quote from a remarkable article that appeared in the Duke Law Journal by Arthur Allen Leff called Unspeakable Ethics, a Natural Law. Dr. Leff's difficulty is the same as Dr. Harris's. He wants to find a foundation for moral values and duties, in this case for the law, that would be independent of human opinion, would be objective and would be in the world. And he can't find one. He says any attempt to ground values in the world is open to the playground bully's retort, who says? And this is how his article...
So you make up a person that says, or you go with something that ancients perceive to be someone who says, but, you know, let's not listen to Shamash. You know, let's not listen to the other gods who gave law codes to those people. Let's go to the one named Yahweh. That's right. He said so.
Concludes. All I can say is this: it looks as if we are all we have. Only if ethics were something unspeakable by us, that is, something transcendent, could law be unnatural and therefore unchallengeable. As things now stand, everything is up for grabs. Nevertheless, napalming babies is bad. Starving the poor is wicked. Buying and selling each other is depraved. There is in the world such a thing as evil. All together now, says who? God help us.
And now Dr. Harris has 5 minutes. Timekeeper, are you ready? Begin.
I'm curious, how many of you consider yourselves to be devout Muslims? Let's see a show of hands. Don't mean to single anyone out, but not many. Now, you're all aware, of course, that the Quran exists and claims to be the perfect word that created the universe. You're aware that once having heard of this possibility and rejecting it, you're all going to hell for eternity. I mean, needless to say, Dr. Craig and I are both going to hell if this vision of life is true. Okay, the problem is that everything Dr. Craig has said tonight, with a few modifications, could be said in defense of Islam. In fact, has been said in defense of Islam. Okay, the logic is exactly the same. We have a book that claims to be the word of the creator of the universe. It tells us about the nature of moral reality.
I love that he just avoided Christianity because psychologically they can't handle it. Cognitive dissonance is too powerful. He went straight to Islam and got most of the people to realize, like, yeah, hold on, dictator of the universe, you mean he's the one who says? Craig's final point, who says? Help us, God. It's like, okay, well, we'll just go to Allah and let you hear about Sharia and let you understand who dictates what's good and evil and what the hell can happen within Sharia law. And even today, under certain laws within certain Muslim countries, chopping hands off, cutting heads off, the whole nine, are laws that actually happen for people, homosexuals. There's all sorts of different taboos and abominations that would cause them to end up doing something absolutely we would hate in Western law, and seeing that kind of stuff happen, we'd lose our minds. But God says so.
And how to live within it. Well, what if Muslims are right? What if Islam is true? Okay, how should we view God in moral terms? How would we view God in moral terms? Or I should say Allah. Hey, we have been born in the wrong place to the wrong parents, given the wrong culture, given the wrong theology. Okay, needless to say, Dr. Craig is doomed. He's been thoroughly confused by Christianity. I mean, just appreciate what a bad position he's now in. to appreciate the true word of God.
Dude, Sam is so good at this.
I've been thoroughly misled by science. Okay, where is Allah's compassion? Okay. And yet, he's omnipotent. He could change this in an instant. He could give us a sign that would convince everyone in this room. And yet he's not going to do it. And hell awaits. And hell awaits our children because we can't help but mislead our children. Okay, now just hold this vision in mind and first appreciate how little sleep you have lost over this possibility. Okay, just feel in yourself at this moment how carefree you are and will continue to be in the face of this possibility. What are the chances that we're all going to go to hell for eternity because we haven't recognized the Quran to be the perfect word of the creator of the universe? Please know that this is exactly how Christianity appears to someone who's not been indoctrinated by it.
Dude, that is so just nail hit with the hammer. I mean, right on the head. And, you know, it doesn't matter. William Lane Craig, with all his sophistication, it won't matter. It won't bat an eye. He'll find some other special words to magically go, oh! But it's so obvious to those who have studied Christianity in depth. I have studied this thing in depth, and I'm sitting here looking at Craig going, man, this guy probably means well, but he's a damn salesman. That's it.
Our scriptures were written by people who, by virtue of their placement in history, had less access to scientific information and facts and basic common sense than any person in this room. Okay, in fact, there's not a person in this room who has ever met a person whose worldview was as narrow as the worldview of Abraham or Moses or Jesus or Muhammad. And most of these people, with a few exceptions, had a moral worldview that was more or less indistinguishable from that of an Afghan warlord today. Okay, and yet Dr. Craig insists that the authors of the Bible knew everything they had to know about the nature of the cosmos and about how to live within it, to guide us at this moment. Okay, I want to suggest to you that this vision of life can't possibly be true. Okay, but just as there's no such thing as Christian physics or Muslim algebra, there can be no such thing as Christian or Muslim morality. Whatever is true about our circumstance in moral terms and in spiritual terms is discoverable now and can be talked about in language that is not an outright affront to everything that we've learned in the last 2,000 years. Okay, what remains for us to discover are the facts in every domain of knowledge that will allow the greatest number of us to live lives truly worth living in this world. I mean, how is it that we can build a global civilization, a viable global civilization of now destined to be 9 billion people, where the maximum number of people truly flourish? That is the challenge we face. Sectarian moral denominations, okay, a world shattered, balkanized by competing claims about an invisible God is not the way to do it. Apart from the fact that there's no evidence in the first place that should be compelling to us to adopt that view. The only tool we need is honest inquiry. And I would suggest to you that if faith is ever right about anything in this domain, it's right by accident. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to all of you.
It's right by accident. It reminds me of, again, I've brought this up earlier with Sir James George Frazer. I feel like humans have naturally, even within the faith systems, seen and observed things and saw patterns and, worked upon those patterns. And those patterns were false science, as Sir James George Frazer says in The Golden Bough. Golden Bough. And, we've worked out a lot of these kinks with modern science, but we know that they were attempting their best to understand the world, but they were clearly far from getting anywhere near actually getting a better grasp of what the world, how it operates, how it functions, what's best for us, etc. So let's see how this Q&A goes. Again, I didn't even realize I missed the complete closings on both ends, but here we go.
We started 15 minutes late, and so I'm going to allow us to go until 9:15. That gives us 30 minutes for questions. As I said at the beginning, we're going to allow Notre Dame students to ask the first 4 questions. After that, the microphones are open to anyone. We'd like to keep a brisk pace for the questions, so please limit your questions to about 30 seconds, and I've asked the debaters to limit their responses to about 2 minutes. I'll take the liberty of urging people to get quickly to their point if these time limits are violated. We have microphones here and here. I think we have microphones. Oh, good. I can see the microphones in the balcony, so I'll just go in a circuit.
Thank you. Dr. Harris, if Dr. Craig could link out of your objections about the problem of evil and the problem of choosing the right religion, so that those weren't really problems, those weren't functioning in the debate, where does that put you dialectically? How do those function in the debate?
Do you mean if I was given good reason to believe that Christianity is true?
Or if Dr. Craig could show that choosing a particular religion wasn't necessary for the grounding of morality, just that some religion being true was sufficient for there being a grounding for morality, and that the problem of evil was somehow answered.
Well, I would never be tempted to dispute that we could make up a religion that, if true, would be a grounding of morality. I mean, you could, those imaginary schemes are there for the asking. We could make them up. We could, and in about 5 minutes, we could make up a better religion than any that exists. I mean, you just take Christianity and cut out Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and already you've done great work. And we could rewrite the 10 Commandments in less than 5 minutes and improve upon it. Being kind to children and swap out the bit about the graven images, and you've already made it a much wiser document now. But that's not the point. I mean, the point is that one point I made, which he never really addressed, is that you're smuggling in a concern for well-being. In any case, you just have a different timeline. If Christianity were true, it would be part of my moral landscape. I mean, if someone like myself is going to suffer in hell for eternity based on what I'm currently thinking, then I clearly am doing the wrong thing. I mean, I would want that information, and I would think, that would be a revelation to me, which I would take seriously, and I would do everything I could to get into heaven. I mean, that would be heaven is if eternity in heaven versus eternity in hell is really the landscape that we're living on. Well, that's part of my moral landscape. It just changes its temporal characteristics. There's just no reason to think that that's the universe we're living in. Thank you.
Up and to my left.
Hi, Professor Craig. You made an interesting analogy. You said that long before we could explain scientifically where light came from, we could distinguish between light and dark, and that the same could be said for good and evil. But to me, that analogy seems dangerous because long before we could explain scientifically where light came from, we said it came from God. Could the same be said for morality? And then also, how do you explain shifts in moral consensus over time?
Okay, I'm not sure I understood all of the question, so I might need our moderator to help me here. The last part of the question was shifts in morality over time. Don't confuse them.
Dude, if you didn't catch that first question, you really should have. Because if she's right, and I don't know this, I've never looked at this, but it would be interesting to see that ancients saw that light came from deities or a deity, meaning the sun came from God, or the light from the sun came from a god, or light at all came from a god. If that's the case, and now we've realized that light is not coming from a deity in order for light to be here. We know that burning gas on the sun, its surface is what's causing the light we see called daytime for us. Once you falsified that isn't needed, what about morality? We think God is needed for ethics or morality. And then finally we realize, there's actually empirical research that we could ground a lot of this stuff. And yeah, of course, some of it's in this gray fuzzy area that doesn't need to be nailed down into black and white. It's in a gray area, but overall, there's pretty basic fundamental black and whites of good and evil that humans should avoid or try to draw up in their ethical systems. That's what seems like she's trying to say, and he kind of just dodged that whole bullet. Like, once light used to be where God gave light. And I don't know if that's coming from Genesis, because at one point before Genesis 4, Genesis chapter 1, I think the fourth day, when the sun, moon, and stars and all these different systems actually gave light and they told time and all that, where did the light come from? Well, the light came from God. Let there be light, and there was light. And God, God called the light day and the darkness night. But there was no sun, moon, and stars yet. So you now know that that's not scientifically true. That can't be true, and that's clearly false. I think that that's what she was trying to get at, and he's just dodging to ethical changes and shifts over time in morality.
Moral ontology with moral epistemology. Moral ontology is the foundation in reality for objective moral values and duties. Moral epistemology is how we come to know the goods that there are and the duties that we have. And clearly,
how could a worldview not be able to develop that? Like, through observation, the golden rule, right? We notice through time, we see the outcomes, we see the empirical data through treating others kind and kindness in return. There's like an empirical way you can measure a lot of this stuff. And I can't imagine he needs to have it grounded and foundationally somewhere else in order for that to even be real or to have any certitude, it seems.
Affirming that there are objective moral values and duties doesn't mean that we always know them infallibly. Clearly, over time, there's such a thing as moral growth and moral development. When I look at my own life, I look back at my life as a young man, and I can see certain attitudes and things that I had that I now would be ashamed of morally. I think I've experienced moral growth. So there's no reason to think that the objectivity of moral values and duties implies that there isn't such a thing as moral growth or a clearer apprehension of the good, or sadly, in some cases, a moral degeneration of a society and turning away from good. So these are two different problems, and my concern is moral ontology. Now, I didn't catch the first part of the question. Mike, did you?
Yeah, tell me if I misrepresent you, but I take it that she's asking, you say that we understood light and dark before we understood the physics of light. She says, but we posited supernatural explanations for light also at that time. Why not think morality is in the same situation?
Yeah, again, I think you misunderstood the analogy there that I'm making. What I'm saying there is distinguishing moral ontology from moral semantics. And what I'm saying is I'm not
all of these freaking words, bro. Dude, you can't tell me this isn't bullshito 102. This is absolute bullshito 101, 102, whatever. Okay, I can't help it. You didn't understand what I meant. And when it came to the principle of ontological semantics and ontological pedantics and then slamantics, you didn't understand. So you're the ignorant fool asking the question, you dumbass. So what I wanted to ultimately get at was, let's dodge the whole point.
A moral semantical theory about the meaning of the words good and evil, right and wrong. I'm talking about their foundation in reality. And so the example of light was simply to give an example of where people understood the meaning of the English word light, even if they didn't know its physical nature in terms of electromagnetic radiation.
Clarifying. Sorry. I get that you're arguing that there needs to be a source for good and evil. That makes sense. So why does that source have to be God? Could it not be that we just haven't discovered what the source is yet?
Well, that would be my second contention, that in the absence of God, I can't see any foundation that would be left for affirming the objectivity of moral values, and particularly the value of human beings and conscious life on this planet. And then that second problem about objective moral duties is especially serious. The is-ought distinction, and then the ought implies can problem, no free will. So that would just be to reiterate the arguments I've already given as to why I think in the absence of God.
He did dodge the whole light comes from God's, and then, would we end up falsifying this to a scientific means? And that's kind of what Sam Harris is saying, is you don't need to ground this in a God in order to falsify not having some form of objective ethics, objective morality.
God, there wouldn't be objective moral values and duties.
I allowed the follow-up only because there was misunderstanding, just so you know. Up and to my right.
Yeah, I've got a question to Dr. Harris. So a lot of the argument, I guess, I've felt like it depended a lot on the definition of good and bad, right and wrong. And I wanted to ask you if you thought it would be possible for there to be. So I've got a two-part question: for there to be a hypothetical God that, so to scratch everything you know about Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, create your own new God, and if it would be hypothetical for this God to perfectly align with your definition of moral theory. So say that this God says and commands that good and bad are dependent on the well-being of conscious animals. And then simultaneously to that question, whether you think a God of love does just that. Because it seems to me, in my experience and then looking at history, that there is no greater continuum across human history than the presence of love, and the fact that we've had marriage, whether homosexual, heterosexual, transgender, from the moment we've been living animals. And so if that really is the root of our well-being, then how does a God of love not promote well-being? So, but and the answer is part.
Yeah. Well, love clearly has a lot to do with our well-being. And if there were a God of love who was really acting like a God of love and was making, the problem is that the existence of God doesn't really add to the moral stature of love in that case, because or the moral stature of the good. I mean, this goes to the Euthyphro dilemma that we haven't spoken about, probably mercifully. But I mean, if it's either intrinsically good or it isn't, and for God to say it's good doesn't make it more good, and it's not good by fiat. So he's either saying it's good because it is good, in which case we can just deal with the fact that it is good, or it's just good because he says it's good, but then he can say any evil thing is good, which Dr. Craig's God does rather often, apparently. So,
dude, Sam is slapping William Lane Craig with this constantly, because Sam knows about the Bible. He knows this stuff. I think that's important when you're engaging guys like Craig.
But love is clearly something we desperately want in our lives, and we're right to want it. We're deeply social creatures. And the fear that is sort of circulating here, that well-being somehow leaves something out that's important, I think, and I argue at some length in my book, is quite unfounded, because whatever you bring to me, which is truly important, you say, okay, you're talking about well-being, but here I'm talking about self-transcending love. This is really important. Well, self-transcending love is probably at the core of the deepest well-being that we can experience as human beings. But likewise, if the Christian hell exists and awaits me, well-being in the end is predicated on avoiding those flames. And so that means all of it, you're smuggling in a concern about consciousness and its future changes, whatever you bring in the moral domain. And so I'm saying we must be honest about that. We ground this in consciousness, and then we can talk about how human beings like ourselves can thrive. And I would grant you that love is probably on the top of the list.
Down here and to my right.
Mr. Harris, from my personal experience and from my faith, I find that Christ's first commandment was to love thy neighbor and thy God. And I believe that if you are a Muslim, then you follow through with that. If you are a devout Muslim and you care about the well-being of all mankind. And that's kind of in relation to my next question, which is like, how would a naturalist respond to amazing miracles by God, which, like, say, the miracle of the sun, which was witnessed by 30,000 to 100,000 people in Fatima, Portugal in 1917, as well as miracles of the Eucharist, in which the Eucharist actually starts to form veins and bleed, and where this blood is actually tested and is found to...
Hold on, is this guy a Muslim? He sounded like a Muslim, and now he's talking about Christian miracles. What's he talking about?
be AB positive from the left ventricle of the heart. And it's actually been researched under leading pathologists in New Zealand to actually be throbbing and living as it was in his laboratory for the 30 days.
Okay. Well,
What kind of horse shit was that I just heard? Oh my gosh. That was some weird ass Catholic stuff, but he said he was Muslim, I thought.
the problem with miracle stories are that they truly are a dime a dozen. I mean, the miracle stories that cash out Christianity are miracle stories set in the context of the pre-scientific context of the first century Roman Empire, attested to by copies of ancient Greek manuscripts that have thousands of discrepancies. Now, there are miracle stories that you can find in India today, attested to by living eyewitnesses. So you look at the people surrounding someone like Satya Sai Baba. Thousands of Western educated people go to India, spend time with Satya Sai Baba, and come away claiming that he's performed a variety of miracles. And in fact, if you add up all those stories, every miracle attributed to Jesus, including the resurrection of the dead, is attributed to Satya Sai Baba. I mean, and millions of people think he's a living God. These stories, from our point of view, don't even merit an hour on the Discovery Channel. Okay, and yet 2.3 billion people think that the miracles of Jesus are worth organizing your life around, and that I think is an intellectually unsustainable disparity. Now, I'm not closed to the evidence of miracles, and it would be trivially easy for God to convince me of his existence or the powers of psychic powers of saints or whatever it is. I mean, if you can tell, I've got a 20-digit number written on a piece of paper in my wallet.
I'm allowed to. I'm sorry.
Okay, but if you tell me what that number is, then we have a very interesting miracle on our hands.
And I still...
I can't let the follow-ups continue. I'm sorry. We have a whole bunch of people lined up. Yes, over here.
Dr. Craig, I know you wanted to kind of stay away from the epistemological questions, but I need some advice. Because accepting in objective good, I guess, where do we go from that practically? Because something happened to me last night where I've been a Christian, but last night God appeared to me and he told me that homosexual lovemaking was every bit as beautiful and loving and good as heterosexual procreative sex in the system of marriage. And he said, come and let everyone know that. I said, no, God, they won't believe me. They will not believe me. How do I where do we go from here practically with divine
This guy, dude, what is up with the Q&A? No wonder y'all told me to react to the Q&A. This is hilarious. Like, what would Craig say to this? He's just gonna think he's bullshitting, right?
religion? Do I leave my church?
You're faint sincerity about this. No, this isn't fooling anybody. It's not the topic of tonight's debate.
Oh, Craig ain't taking it seriously.
I'm not even going to address a silly question like this.
I didn't mean to offend you. I'm
Sorry, we aren't doing follow-ups with the question. I allowed the one up there because there was a misunderstanding, but the question has come out.
He didn't answer it. If the kid or whoever was actually just straightforward instead of making it funny and held it like it was sincere, that God appeared to him last night, told him that same-sex, same thing, homosexual, heterosexual love is the same, and there's nothing wrong with the same-sex relationship. What do I do with this? And Scripture has been interpreted by people to mean that it's not. What do you do then? How do you go from there, right? And what would Craig say? I'd go with scripture, I bet.
It's received.
You would think he'd say, no, go with your gut, right? Go with what the Holy Ghost, the witness of the Holy Ghost tells you.
The answer.
So this question is for Dr. Harris.
Sam gave him a thumbs up. Sam gave the kid a thumbs up. That was funny.
Unfortunately, mine won't be as funny. Okay. So it seems to me that there's a distinction in your argument that I'd like you to discuss, which is the conceptual possibility of the most miserable world and its material possibility. So basically what I'm asking is whether you can cite any evidence to believe that this is not the world that is most miserable or otherwise. So if you can't, let's assume this is the world with the material conditions for the most misery to exist. Then wouldn't it be moral to destroy it all, destroy all consciousness? So I'm just wondering, how would you distinguish that this is not the worst possible world?
Well, it may be the only world with conscious life. I mean, I think, I doubt that given the trillion-fold universe we're living in, but we don't have any evidence of life elsewhere, much less conscious life. But so your question cuts to the issue of, what if it's all about well-being? Well, why don't we just, kill all the unhappy people in their sleep tonight? Okay, wouldn't that raise sort of the aggregate level of well-being on Earth? And there are infinite number of thought experiments like that you can come up with that seem to push on this concern. Well, if it's just about suffering, well, you can just eradicate it painlessly for people, and you have increased the net well-being. But all of those thought experiments neglect all of the cascading effects of living in a world in which we do that sort of thing, where the consequences of doing that. So why don't we, in the classic experiment that everyone trots out is, what if you're a doctor and you realize that you have somebody who could benefit from the organs of, you have 5 people who could benefit from the organs of one person who's sitting in your waiting room. So you go into your waiting room, you knock him out and you euthanize him, you vivisect him and you give away his organs, okay? That seems like it's a net benefit to 5 people. Okay, but if we were all living in a world where at any moment your doctor could vivisect you and steal your organs, that would have rather obvious, ghastly consequences that none of us would want to submit to. And our intuitions about the sanctity of human life, caring for people, treating people as ends in themselves rather than means to some other end, all of that conserves intuitions we have about trust and its importance in life, and all of these ways in which we are knit together as a community, and ways in which we only rise or fall together. I mean, so it's in a very important sense, our happiness is dependent upon the happiness of others, and we are not atomized selves that are radically separate. So this idea that killing everyone, I mean, first of all, killing everyone would eradicate all the suffering, yes, but it would also foreclose all the happiness, and it would nullify every possibility of experience. So if you think that a universe where the lights are on is better than a universe where the lights are off, then turning the lights off is worse. But I could imagine a universe which it would be worth turning the lights off in. I mean, the Christian hell is one of them. You'd be doing people a lot of goods, whether you know this.
Sorry, no follow-ups. But I'm going to be really strict about this.
Answering the question. Well, to answer your question, if this is the only world, well, then it is by definition both the most miserable and the happiest, and everything in between. And I just have no idea what else is out there.
Up on my right.
Dr. Craig, when discussing Islam and more specifically the Taliban, you said that they have the wrong God, citing, I assume, their violent attacks based on jihad. And because of that, how do you know that you have the right God? And if you do have the right God, what explanation can you offer for him authorizing the Crusades?
Again, this isn't the topic of the debate tonight.
Dude, it's a Q&A, but come on, answer it,
But let me just say that one of the side areas that I specialized in my theological studies in Germany is Islam. And I'm persuaded that there are better reasons for believing that God has revealed himself decisively in Jesus of Nazareth by raising him from the dead after his crucifixion, whereas Islam is committed not only to the fact that Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, but that he was not even crucified, which is the one historical fact about Jesus of Nazareth that is universally acknowledged by New Testament critics across the spectrum. And so, with all the best will in the world, I could not be a Muslim. I see a lot of points of commonality. I applaud the monotheism of Islam, but in the end, I think that the Muslim faith gets it wrong about Jesus.
So, Dr. Harris, I think that you've posed some interesting challenges to Christianity and to theism in general, but I want to return to the issue of debate, which is the objectivity of morality. And so, you say that you can base objective morality on the assumption that this worst possible world is bad. So I think that we can all agree on that statement that it is bad, but what's to say that that's not simply just a subjective assertion, that it's just something based on human opinion? I don't see any reason to think that that's an objective.
Well, I tried to show you in my opening remarks why that particular concern is not interesting or necessary. You can play that same game with everything that we think is objective. So why does 2 + 2 make 4? How it seems to make 4 to us, but how do we know that's not just a human intuition? I mean, what is wrong with a logical argument that contradicts itself? Why is self-contradiction not a good way to argue? Well, it just doesn't seem to fly. Now, you could always try to get behind that as an epistemological skeptic or a logical skeptic and say, well, this is just how you monkeys are wired to think. And there are interesting ways in which science at its forefront does create some of that tension. There are ways in which our logical expectations begin to break down in physics, but we use other scientific intuitions, and in this case mathematical intuitions, to try to get behind them. You have to pick yourself up by your bootstraps somewhere. Okay, it's better than pulling yourself down by them. And so you have to every objective paradigm has to make a first move. It has to step into the light based on some axiomatic judgment that is not self-justifying. Gödel proved this in logic, and this is true for arithmetic. It's true for things far more complicated than arithmetic. I'm saying that a recognition that this universe offers a spectrum of experience, on the one hand, truly intolerable, and on the other, sublimely wonderful, and that we all know that movement across this spectrum toward the sublime is better than movement toward the unendurable and pointless suffering. Now, that's, again, you might ask, well, what about suffering that actually turns out to be good in the end? What about the suffering of, the stress of learning to play a musical instrument or whatever? Again, that's not a counter. I mean, there are ways to climb. We might have to go down a little bit to go up to a higher place on this landscape, and that we can make sense of that kind of struggle. And so I'm not equating the good with mere pleasure in a way that Dr. Craig suggested.
Okay, thank you, Clinton here.
Yes, Dr. Craig. In your refutation of Mr. Harris, you rely very heavily on the distinction between is statements and ought statements, where you could take the entire collection of known is statements and never be able to logically derive an ought statement. So I have one question for you. Is the statement God exists an is statement or an ought statement?
That's an is statement.
So you can't derive any moral, objective duties from it?
Not from that alone.
Then you have unstated premises in your argument.
Well, no, I stated them clearly. I said that they're based in God's commandments, and that moral obligations and duties arise in response to imperatives issued by a competent authority. And so I would see that our moral duties are grounded in the imperatives issued by the good itself.
Okay.
I can actually just add one piece there, because I want to bring back this notion of psychopathy, because it now strikes me as even more relevant than I thought. So this idea that morality comes merely from the mere issuance of a competent authority. One of the features of psychopathy is an inability to distinguish true moral precepts that relate to the well-being of people and things that merely issue from a competent authority. So if you ask children sitting in a classroom, is it okay to drink a soda in class if the teacher gives you permission? Most of them will say yes. If you ask them, is it okay to punch your neighbor in the face if the teacher gives you permission? They immediately recognize the distinction between a moral infraction and a mere conventional rule, and this is very young children. But children at risk for psychopathy don't. Children at risk for psychopathy think that rules are just given by an authority. So if the teacher tells you can punch a child in the face, you can punch a child in the face. This is, again, I'm not accusing religious people in general of being psychopaths, but there's a psychopathic core to this moral worldview. This divine command theory that Dr. Craig is advocating,
Dude, he took over the debate,
suggests that if God only tells you to sacrifice your firstborn son, it is good to do it. That's where goodness comes from.
Yes, he's spot on. Clearly, Craig that is exactly what his position is. Now, of course, God would not want that. Yet, Abraham was such a hair on my chinny chin close one, huh?
And so you got people waking up in trailer parks all over America, suffering some form of mental illness that's destabilized them and made them vulnerable to this way of thinking. And there are people who kill their children thinking they're Abraham, who just didn't get interrupted by an angel. And this is the kind of morality that you get out of a divine command theory that, again, offers no retort to the jihadist other than, sorry, Buster, you happen to have the wrong God.
Dude, I'm ending it there. This is so good. Sam did a fantastic job dealing with William Lane Craig. I really do appreciate you all recommending I do not stop where I stopped and to continue into Q&A just to hear what he has to say, because he's spot on and a lot of good questions, funny questions came up. I hope you'll join our community. Please participate in these reacts by commenting. By commenting, you help the channel grow. YouTube sees that interaction and they reward channels that you do that with. Like the video, share this on your social medias to get other people involved, to join the community and to consider these reactions along with me. Because there's a lot of information that is out there that I think a lot of people haven't seen, and maybe you enjoy it a second time. Maybe you've seen this stuff and I haven't. You get to see my first time reaction. But I really, really love these kind of conversations. They help us understand better what the different positions are and maybe making up our own mind on what we think is the case. Sincerely, I appreciate all of you, and until next time, see you then.